Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I am really delighted to be here today with Jeff Sinclair, folks who were at McKinsey, who McKinsey served, anything related to operations, that name will be very familiar. He was for a very long time one of the senior most global leaders in the practice, one of the consortium of kind of 5 global leaders who led the operations practice. He started several of the sub practices. So it's a real delight to, Jeff, welcome you to the show.
Thanks, Will. It's great to be here.
So Jeff, this will be a little bit of a different episode than some of the other ones. You kindly offered to, after I asked, to give us a little bit of a history of the operations practice at McKinsey. And so McKinsey became, really one of the leading firms, if not the leading firm, to implement things like the Toyota production system and lean operations. And some people aren't aware of that. They think it's all about strategy, but operations became a very big part of the firm, and you were part of that. So maybe start us at the beginning of your time there and just sort of walk us through the history of operations at McKinsey.
I'd be happy to do that. Please also obviously interrupt as we go, because I may wander off into places that you find less than interesting. So please keep me connected to where you want to head.
All right.
So it's a bit of a misnomer that McKinsey was not involved in operations. I joined the firm in 1981, and all the way back then, the firm was doing some operations work. But I think it was primarily known as a strategy firm, as well as doing some organization work, marketing work, things like that. But clients had always used us in some ways for operations, but it was a very small part of the practice, and it wasn't really all that well known. But in the 1980s, we started being drawn into operations more by our clients, to be honest. And a lot of it grew out of the automotive practices in Europe and in North America. So as you're doing strategy work or organization work for, an automotive OEM or parts supplier, oftentimes operations is actually a strategic function for them. If they can't serve their customers with high quality, cost-effective, on-time, in-full operational effectiveness, they're not going to be strategically successful. And so as we were formulating recommendations to, expand around the world or enter new product market segments, oftentimes our clients would say, well, gee, could you help us kind of take that to the next step? And so they almost drew us in to doing things like manufacturing performance improvement, supply chain planning, new product development, effectiveness, things like that. And so as the firm grew and kept serving clients more extensively, when I joined the firm in 81, there were about 500 people in the firm. And now what is it? I don't even know the number. It's 40,000 or some huge number. And we were not known for operations, and even, a small percentage of a small firm isn't a very big practice. And now it is, 25 or 30% of what McKinsey does worldwide. So, you can do the math. It's a very big component of what the firm has become.
Talk to us maybe in the 80s, and we can go, chronologically. What were some of the things the firm did in the 80s to start building up that operations capability? Because the kind of the people there were a lot of Harvard Business School alums with MBAs who maybe, had some strategy or finance or org or marketing experience, but they weren't factory floor people. So did McKinsey recruit some, people with the Toyota production system experience? Or tell us how the firm in the 80s was building that capability.
Yeah, so really a lot of the work that was originally being done was kind of first principles problem solving work, and people learning about how a factory floor works or how a distribution center works by going in and kind of learning from the ground up. That's obviously not very time effective nor cost effective for clients. And so we pretty quickly recognized we needed to hire some new people. In addition to the traditional MBA generalist hires that the firm had always hired, we started going after people with specific functional expertise, particularly in manufacturing. So we started recruiting people from Toyota, Danaher, the Toyota production or the Toyota Supplier Support Center, Firms that were known for really good manufacturing capability, we started hiring some of their people. And so we would bring those folks in, and we created what is now a pretty well-defined career path within the firm, the specialist path, the expert path. So we would bring in folks, they would, rather than being on a generalist path to kind of grow up as most of us have been growing up in the firm, we then created a second career path that was in parallel with the generalist path, which was in fact the expert path. The operations practice was kind of at the leading edge of that. Other functional practices were doing similar things in marketing, for doing market research, things like that in organization or whatever. But we had to actually work with the firm to create new career paths. By the way, not without a fair amount of mistakes made along the way. We would hire some people. They would come in. The firm would not really understand them all that well. And so as they were doing their work, they would, serve their clients well, but not necessarily be doing the kinds of things that the typical, associate to engagement manager to what was then senior engagement manager, which is now associate partner path, then path towards partnership. And so we struggled along the way to help those people continue to be successful within the firm. And so in the first, I would say in the 80s and in the 90s, we had many iterations of the expert path, and folks come in. Some succeeded, many struggled and failed. And for that, we had to continuously improve how the firm recognized and understood the contributions of people beyond kind of the traditional generalist path. In some ways, I feel bad about what happened to some of those people. On the other hand, they came in, they had the McKinsey brand name attached to their name. And if they left the firm, many of them went off and became plant managers or senior operations leaders. And so it wasn't necessarily a bad thing for their career path overall, but we struggled to really create that path within the firm.
Expand on that a bit. I'm curious to hear both about the kind of bureaucratic maneuvering that was required to create that career path. And you mentioned struggles. Obviously, don't want to mention names, but talk to us about some of the ways those people were contributing, but how they were not like exactly fitting in. Just expand on that a bit.
Well, as you advance in the firm, particularly as you go from junior partner to senior partner, what used to be called principals to director, which is now junior partner to senior partner, increasingly it becomes about client leadership. And to become, a director of client service in McKinsey parlance, you had to have relationships with the senior executives in a company that would then help you have a counseling relationship with a senior executive, which would ultimately lead to ongoing opportunities to serve them. The firm kind of eschews commercial language, but really being able to bring in the next wave of work, assuming it was in fact the right work to be done for the client. When you're in a functional role, oftentimes it's hard to be in a position to be in the room to have those senior counseling relationships. You come in, you do your thing, the firm does great work for the client, but you don't necessarily grow into a senior client leadership role in that position. And so therefore, one of the things the firm had to learn how to do was recognize the contribution of subject matter expertise to our ability to serve clients and give people credit, if you will, for developing new service lines, new ways of thinking about solving problems, new ways about thinking about helping clients execute more effectively, and give equivalent credit in the personnel processes to those contributions that you give to somebody for bringing in more client work. Mm-hmm. And the firm struggled with that a lot. Now there are many career paths within McKinsey that have equivalent value recognition within the firm by the personnel committees and promotion to senior roles in the firm. But, during the early stages of the operations practice, the firm didn't have those multiple career paths. And so we went through multiple iterations. There were several folks that were leading the way on this of really learning how to define those career paths and give people credit for it.
So how were experts used on projects? Like, would they be sort of on a project 4 or 5 days a week, like an associate or EM would be? And what sort of role were they playing on that team typically?
It was a mixture. Oftentimes they would come in as a subject matter expert for a short period of time during a longer engagement, or they would come in as a counselor or consultant to the team, what McKinsey called CD roles, consulting director roles. They would come in and lend their expertise, particularly if you're in the diagnostic stage where you're trying to discover if there's an opportunity, or they would come in the follow-on work and actually help drive execution and implementation, which was very common in things like manufacturing transformation work, where you would go in, identify opportunities, maybe do a redesign of a line and really figure out how it ought to be reconfigured to become much more of a lean operation. And they would come in and actually be full-time execution people afterwards, after the initial diagnostic period. So in those, more executional roles, they would be full-time staffed. In more the diagnostic phase of, that kind of work, they would be more on a part-time basis. And then, they would lend their expertise, and the traditional associates would then go gather the data, do the analysis, and identify what the opportunity might be.
So then it sounds like one of the issues was, as they were at the firm for more time, they would keep doing this sort of expert CD kind of role, but it was difficult for them to step up into the more counseling roles. So they might be developing knowledge or doing a great job teaching consultants how to do operational excellence work, but they weren't able to kind of develop new opportunities for the firm and get that counseling relationship. And then
it was harder for them. And that's what the firm really recognized at that point in time. Now the firm moves forward into the mid 90s, early 2000s, and these expert roles were actually allowing us to do terrific work with clients. Everybody in the firm started to realize this. The personnel committees had to continually evolve in how they were evaluating. And that personnel process would be, at the associate level, that typically happens within an office. What the firm did at that time was it actually started to then give some of that personnel role responsibility to the functional practices themselves. So, a lean manufacturing expert or a supply chain expert, which they are now today as well, would be hired into the practice. They might be physically resident in an office because they need a place to live, but the practice would then take over that personnel, career development role. So evaluation of performance, counseling and coaching on how to go to the next step and to begin to evolve these new career paths. And then the firm-wide personnel committees were still there for the evaluation and election of junior partners and then senior partners. And so over time, those firm-wide personnel practices had to be evolved to be able to recognize that, the contribution of this new knowledge capability is something that is creating opportunities for us to serve clients more effectively. So if you think about the traditional consultants being the retail provider of the services to the clients, the functional practices became wholesalers into those client service teams, and the firm began to learn how to recognize their contribution as really high value added that was contributing to the firm's ability to expand its service to clients. And when you look at it today, there's still a bit of a tension between the generalist and specialist paths within McKinsey. But it's much, much better than it ever used to be. I think an interesting indicator of that is Bob Sternfels, the managing director of the firm. He was a functional practice guy. He wasn't a functional expert. He came in as a traditional guy, but he was a functional practice leader like I was. He never ran an office. He didn't run an industry practice, but he was a very important leader in the operations practice. And he's now the managing director of the firm. And that's a big deal to say that the firm now recognizes, the level of contribution to the functional practices so much that the leader of the firm today grew out of that, that career path within the firm.
What was it like working to overcome those internal institutional barriers to that switch? It sounds like it took a decade and a half almost, it sounds like. So there must have been, pushback against it. What was it like to kind of make that transition internally? And what do you think made it take so long?
Well, the firm is a very has a very strong culture, right? In some ways, it's like joining the Borg. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but you are joining the firm. And I think it's true with a lot of firms, but the firm I had experience with was McKinsey, and this culture was so strong. And so when you'd bring in these non-traditional folks, they were like a virus being introduced into that organism. And so the firm, just didn't understand how to accept it. Over time, more and more of the senior partners in positions of power, whether that was on a personnel committee or an office practice or an office-based, leader, would begin to put their arms around the functional practice leaders and say, look, we're going to help you. We're going to help you navigate this path. And so it was a cultural evolution. There was no revolution. It was an evolution. It did take, I think 18 years is probably an optimistic estimate. It was a couple of decades for the firm to really evolve from, one dominant career path of the generalist partner to being able to have now multiple career paths growing up through multiple ways of delivering, creating value and delivering value for clients. And, I remember in the early days, one of the office leaders that was kind of providing some cover for us, that in the operations practice said, in a lot of ways, you guys are kind of committing professional suicide. And we were the generalist folks trying to help develop this practice. He said, you guys are going to die, but we're going to try to help you because we know it's helping us serve our clients better. And eventually that kind of spirit of partnership and kind of recognizing that it was expanding the ability to serve our clients well, became increasingly well recognized within the firm. And over time, the firm really will embrace anything that ultimately leads to being able to serve clients better and more effectively and more extensively. And so it gradually got embraced, but it took time. And it took building, friendships with people that had power in the firm, just like any organization. You have more than two people in a room, there are politics. The firm likes to say it's not a particularly political organization, but that's silliness. All organizations have politics. And over time, the politics embraced the idea of having multiple functional practices, including the operations practice. And, the firm is what it is today as a result.
Before we move on to the 90s, for the 80s, we talked a bit about how it sounds like it kind of originated with a pull from manufacturing clients. Tell us a little bit about, for the operations practice in the 90s, what were some of the big themes around like knowledge, and any kind of breakthroughs that McKinsey had in terms of knowledge and thought leadership, and also talk a bit about what the firm was doing around, training people in these lean principles or operating, Toyota production system type principles.
Yeah, so a lot of what I was saying before about career paths, by the way, extended well beyond the 80s. That was into the 90s and 2000s. So I'm jumping around chronologically on you. I apologize a bit for that. But so back to your question about training and expanding and some of the things we learned. Yeah, I'll give you a very specific example. One of the most amazing things that happened through the 90s was as the firm expanded its service to healthcare providers, so hospital systems, et cetera. One of the things that started to happen was the folks that were actually expanding into healthcare, several of them had grown out of the operations practice. And when you go into a hospital, one of the things you learn in a hospital is, things like turning around an operating theater more quickly so that it's ready for the next patient. And all the instruments are, sterilized and everything's set up so the doctors have everything in the right place at the right time and the nurses are there able to serve them well. That is a place that is ripe for the use of lean principles, of the Toyota production system principles that we learned in terms of rapid changeover times, in terms of having things placed in the right place. 5S techniques is, what you would call that. Being able to schedule so that you actually understood throughput times and scheduling so that you could create a demand-driven pull schedule as opposed to a supply push schedule. All of those things are directly applicable to how you think about scheduling, an operating theater in a hospital. So one of the things that happened was the healthcare practice started pulling in and seeking help from the operations practice, which was fantastic, because here was a industry practice that was growing at a very rapid clip as the healthcare system, particularly in North America, was trying to do a better job of serving patients. And it started drawing in some of the functional expertise that you would have traditionally thought might have been in a automotive assembly plant or a steel mill. And it was directly applicable and allowing us to create real value in a practice where people didn't expect it. There were some aha moments that happened as a result. So then you had some of these folks that maybe had started at Toyota join the healthcare practice because they enjoyed serving those clients. And now you started to see that the operational capability could in fact expand beyond its traditional roots, and there was demand pull for it in the industry practices. And so things kind of took off from there. Similar things happened in, the consumer goods practice for supply chain management. Things happened in, even the banking practice for things that had more to do with how do you think about, throughput of a claims management process in an insurance company or whatever. All of those things lent themselves to a lot of the principles that we had been developing in the manufacturing and supply chain practices within operations.
Would you say, kind of modestly take some credit for McKinsey's ops practice of any particular changes in, let's say, some industry in America? Would you say, like you mentioned, healthcare operating theaters at hospitals? Did McKinsey do a lot of projects there at like lots of hospitals, and then even hospitals that McKinsey didn't serve, they probably learned from ones that McKinsey did? Or is that a thing in the healthcare industry, or is there another industry where you'd say, yeah, McKinsey really kind of helped drive that whole transformation?
I don't know. I've got kind of classic McKinsey, arrogance for the firm overall, but a certain amount of humility individually within the firm, because it really does take an awful lot of people to make stuff happen at the firm. And I was, working with a group of amazing folks that, incrementally things would occur, and not always positively, but when you added it all up, the incremental changes, the demand from one partner to say, hey, I want to pull you in. I think we could do something at, this particular healthcare system where we might be able to, think differently about how we do, SKU management in a consumer products good in their consumer products company, in their distribution system or whatever. And you'd gradually get more and more demand pull. So, when you say, would I take credit, or would, a small group of individuals take credit? I think that one of the powers of McKinsey is it truly is a partnership. And what I think what did happen was, yeah, I'll take credit along with all the other folks that were trying to shepherd this practice along for nurturing the capability to continue to grow, and then working with our partners, particularly in the industry practices, pulling through the functional capability. And so you could then deliver that through the client service teams to clients. But in terms of an individual aha moment, no, I think this was hundreds of moments of truth. Jan Carlson used to run SAS Airlines, and he talked about moments of truth. When you walked onto an airline and, the flight crew would greet you, that was a moment of truth. There were moments of truth when you would go in with a partner as a functional practice leader into a new kind of environment, whether that was a bank or a healthcare system or a CPG company or a high-tech firm or whatever. And you'd go in there and you would, in fact, have a conversation with a client, and there would be an aha moment among the senior people there that, oh, McKinsey can do this stuff too. It doesn't just have to be Kearney or Accenture or whatever. McKinsey does this kind of work, and then you'd get engaged and things would move forward from there. There were lots of wins, there were lots of losses, and you kind of kept figuring it out along the way. We did organize ourselves to say, look, we know we need to have clients, so let's develop partnerships with these industry practices and work in the wholesale fashion through to the retail side of the firm, if you will. We need to know something, so we continuously invested in new knowledge, both bringing in knowledge that was well established, like lean operations and the Toyota production system, like other things with regard to supply chain management, et cetera, as well as then investing in developing our own knowledge and versions of those kinds of things. So you need clients, you need knowledge, you need people. So we did actually work really hard on these career paths along the way. And then you also need to manage the practice as an enterprise. And so we created this 4-part framework of client, knowledge, people, and infrastructure to really build a practice. And we managed that pretty explicitly along the way through the 90s and into the 2000s to kind of create the functional practices as legitimate entities in parallel with offices and industry practices in the firm, so that all 3 axes, geography, industry practice, and functional practice, could become co-equal.
Talk to me a bit about some of the big knowledge initiatives that you undertook over the years. Which were some of the most, tell us about some of the most successful ones that you felt really kind of moved the conversation with clients.
Well, clearly a huge one from my own personal experience was partnering up with particularly, I'll name one name, Felix Brook, who he and I kind of were shepherding a lot of the building of the manufacturing capability in the firm in the kind of through the 90s and into the 2000s. So really understanding and codifying how you think about the technical system, the management system, the people leadership system of how you drive manufacturing performance transformation, and then expanding that to say it's not just about manufacturing, it's about any kind of process that has flow in it. And that then takes you into things like healthcare and banking, as I talked about before. But we invested a lot in codifying, what is it that really creates a successful operating system in a company. One of the interesting things I think we found when we started hiring a bunch of people from places like Toyota, Danaher, others that had grown up in those systems, sometimes they struggled to actually teach clients how to do it, because for them it was the system that they were raised in, as opposed to going into an operation that was operating in more traditional kinds of ways and didn't have the culture and the people skills in place. And so we had to invest to learn how to understand what is the current state of maturity of operational capability in an organization. Where do you want to head longer term, kind of to that future state, classic current state, future state, lean thinking, but apply it at the overall organizational culture, capability building level. And so we invested a lot in understanding how to do the design of that operating system, the design of the management system, how you think about even daily huddles at the shop floor, all the way up to the cadence of meetings, at the senior executive level. So we had to learn a lot about how do you design the system, how do you train people and build capability to operate the system, and how do you use pilot projects to actually demonstrate that it really works, so that you can kind of create momentum in an organization that it then begins to take hold, and they can then take it forward on a continuous improvement basis going forward. So we invested a lot in how do you actually go from, not very good to, very, very good operational capability with people that hadn't been kind of raised in that from the beginnings of their career. That was tough. That was really tricky.
Now, and I was a beneficiary of that, because I went through the Operations Academy in 2005, where I was taught this kind of Venn diagram with the technical system, the management system, and the mindsets and behaviors, like overlap.
All that. Yeah,
right?
That's what I'm talking about. So you understand it from having been through it.
When you say that the firm invested, what does that mean? Did the firm, outside of projects, do like research, or did they have people try to compare results across projects? Or what did that investment, what form did it take?
Well, the McKinsey does a tremendous amount, not just in the operations practice, but does a tremendous amount of actual knowledge project work. So if you think about where does management science, if you will, advance? At the university level, there's a lot of, theoretical stuff that is done, financial theory, operations theory, whatever. I now am actually a teacher at the University of Michigan, and I see some of my tenure track colleagues in their research. But that's more kind of, the theory of the case. I think what McKinsey excels at is what I'll call the applications engineering. So to take, all of the different theories that you might see and actually translate that into actual service delivery capability, service lines for our clients, right? And so I think, when you add up all of the knowledge projects that are funded by the firm, staffed with people internally at the firm, sometimes in collaboration with a client or two, oftentimes not, maybe some internal work, and then you go find a place to try it out with a client, and you kind of iterate back and forth between using it in a client and actually doing some sit down and think about it kind of work. The firm invests a huge amount every year. I think at one point we estimated we spent more than the top 5 business schools in the world combined every year in the research of and development of new service lines for our clients. I was the global knowledge leader for the operations practice for quite a long time. And we would actually sponsor projects, whether it was in supply chain or product development or manufacturing or service operations. We would sponsor projects where the firm would take its current knowledge, take it to the next level so that we could actually serve clients more effectively. Those knowledge development efforts were a huge investment in the firm. And again, it occurred across multiple functional practices. And in the operations practice, we did a ton of it.
Can you make it tangible for listeners? Maybe pick one knowledge development project that you recall that was particularly successful or that you thought was particularly valuable. And when you say that the firm was investing and paying for it, it's what, an engagement manager and an associate sitting in a room together, like just on the whiteboard, or is it going out and like testing things at different clients, or like what were they actually doing? What was they actually doing to create this knowledge? Walk us through what one of those knowledge projects would have been like.
I'll give you one that resulted in a network of things we called model factories around the world in the manufacturing practice. The model factory is actually a physical location where McKinsey teams can bring client people in, and they get trained in a simulated environment in how to think about the redesign and then capability building and transformation of a manufacturing operation inside of a plant. And so we recognized at the time that the training for this capability building in a lot of organizations was really weak. So we actually took, we formulated teams around the world to figure out what are the different modules that people need to learn, whether that's they need to learn what 5S really means. They need to learn what rapid changeover, what Toyota always called SMED, single minute exchange of dies, which is used in a stamping operation, but you expand the ideas of rapid turnover from a stamping operations, and then you can apply it to anything, including a hospital operating theater. But whether it's 5S or SMED or pull scheduling, the creation of the Kanban methodology of demand-driven pull scheduling through a plant, levelizing of production so that in fact you create common cycle times through multiple stages of operation so you can levelize and synchronize operations. All of those kinds of things that you have to be able to put in place in a plant, we had to learn how to codify and make tangible in training modules. And so we, over a period of multiple projects, we would take, one or two people. These usually are, as they're not massive things. They're like the typical McKinsey team of an engagement leader plus, one or two or three people for a period of maybe 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever. And an output of that would be a new module. Over time, we started accumulating, multiple kind of objects, if you will. And we also recognized that coming out of the manufacturing operation might help. And so with the leadership, it actually started in Europe with our manufacturing practice leadership there. The first one was started in Germany. We actually created a model factory, very small operation. We would then have people staffed into it. and clients could come through and get trained. And so, the firm eventually built multiple model factories around the world. I was involved in standing one up in Atlanta, for example. I think at one point there was even a conference room in Atlanta with my name and picture on it, of all things, when I retired from the firm. But so we invested in building that knowledge, and then we also recognized that we need to be able to deliver that knowledge in a non-traditional way. And we actually created these model factories. Again,
And
they're
these model
small.
factories, these were like real tool and die machines, or they were kind of out of a suitcase, or like what was the thing that the
It was
model
a combination. Interesting you say out of a suitcase. There were some things that actually you could put in a suitcase, take it to a client, and do kind of changeover workshops, or scheduling workshops or whatever. But the model factories themselves were 15-20,000 square feet, so not huge, but not tiny either.
I mean, so these are
And
like
within there,
real machines. I mean, there's like
they're real machines. There might be a CNC machine in there that you would actually change over, or we would create some smaller kinds of assembly stations with jigs and fixtures and things like that. So they were real operations. It wasn't a full blown multi-billion dollar automotive assembly plant, but you'd have a process through which something would be produced.
Okay.
And you'd schedule that operation, all of that kind of stuff. And so, yes, there was physical, hardware in there. There was know-how and human resource power in there, and we would help clients kind of train.
Okay, that's very cool. Talk to me about, you also started a couple practices. You mentioned that you helped launch the product development practice. Tell us a bit about that. What was the initial pull from clients, and tell us about the evolution of building a practice.
Yeah, the product development practice was an interesting one because, if a manufacturing company spends, 25 or 30% of their resources on, human beings and materials going through, a plant, might even be 50 or 60%, right? That goes into the cost of goods sold. They might spend 2 or 3 or 4% of sales on R&D. So, heavy R&D technology companies like pharma or tech are spending, 12, 15%. More typical automotive companies are spending 2, 3, or 4%, and a lot of companies are somewhere in between. So the amount of money people are spending on product development in a lot of operations is fairly small, but the impact that 2, 3, 4 percentage points of sales has on the ability of the company to be successful, because they're coming up with better, cheaper, more innovative products and services, that is strategic, right? And so being able to work with companies to understand, really define customer value, and do the customer discovery that helps you then develop the functional specification that then translates into the technical specification that then translates into the work that gets done by the people actually doing the product and service development, is a big deal. And just like other things I described, we weren't very good at it. Our clients wanted us to help because we'd say, hey, you ought to get into this market and do this kind of thing with your product. It looks like there's a big opportunity to drive growth. Okay, McKinsey, help us do it. Oh, well, we don't know how to do that. So we said, we better learn how. And so again, we went out, we found people that knew how to do things like, functional, customer discovery, functional specification development, doing kind of the Honda house of quality stuff of translating functional requirement to technical requirement, and really translating that into, what is our product development, path, what is our roadmap for our overall product service line, and within that, what are the individual product development programs that we're going to do? How do you think about funding them? When you apply the funding, how do you decide which ones you're going to do and not do based on strategic and potential financial value? So we learned how to do that, similar to the way we learned how to do manufacturing. And we ended up, again, a lot of it started in more traditional kind of automotive, industrial electronics, that kind of arena, but it did translate into areas like consumer products, high tech, even healthcare and other places, because understanding real customer needs, wants, and desires, translating that into what products and services ought to be developed to be able to serve those customers better, and then translating that into, okay, how do we actually develop these products? We needed to learn what was well known in the industry, as well as kind of develop some of our own capabilities. And we kind of built it. That was largely through the 90s and into the 2000s that we kind of expanded our capability to do that, rather than just helping clients kind of on a one-off basis with, first principle problem solving.
What were some of the classic project types that you would do in the product development practice? I know when I was at the firm, there'd be certain project types that the firm would do just dozens or hundreds of times.
Yeah. So one that I'll just give you an example. I was involved in was with a company in the tech industry that had done a major acquisition. People would recognize it, instantly if I use the name. And they acquired a company. They had to put together their products line with the acquired company's product line. And what we ended up doing was a product platforming strategy, and then a product development roadmap, and then actually helping them through the first couple of generations of actual product development and release into the marketplace. And so we helped identify what's the range of market applicability, what are the customer needs, what is the platform that needs to be put in place to be able to have the range of product capability so that each individual product is differentiated, but you can maximize the amount of commonality across that product line. So you can have multiple SKUs that serve different product market needs off of a more harmonized, commonized base, and you differentiate where it actually creates value for customers, and you standardize where it doesn't. And so understanding how to think about that platform from both a hardware point of view and a software point of view, so that you could then manage the product development roadmap in a way that got product to market faster. Each product that was introduced was cheaper to produce, and yet because it was targeted and well tailored to customer needs, would have a competitive or attractive price point, and so you could expand gross margin on each individual product sold. And then combining that with what's going on in the technology world. So if I've got a product development roadmap, I've also got then a technology management roadmap. Those two things have to fit together. And then also being aware of what's going on from a competitive point of view of who's doing what to whom, where, and why. So working with a client over that particular one was over a couple of years on a post-merger integration situation to do product consolidation and then move into the ability to have a better product development based on a platform strategy. Ended up resulting in the company going from losing money in the product category to being the industry leader worldwide and making a ton of money. That was a cool piece of work that was actually multiple projects over a few years that resulted in tremendous strategic and financial value for the client.
Now, one type of project that I never got staffed on at the firm, but sounded cool, was these kind of product teardown type projects where you'd buy some competitor's product and disassemble it and figure out, okay, what would it cost to make one of these and how did they make it, so forth. Talk to me a bit. And that is something that just an ordinary consultant off the street would not have the skills to do. It's a pretty technical sort of thing. Tell us about how those projects came about and what sort of expertise you had to build to be able to do that.
Yeah, so what you're describing is something that most people would call reverse engineering. A partner that used to be with the firm actually once said, well, let's call that service line Gneering, which is engineering spelled backwards. So reverse engineering, it's fun. I was involved in one in the early days back in the 90s, where we actually went out and bought competitors' products and took our company's products. This was happened to be in the copier business, copier duplicator business, which would now be like a business hub where it would actually be connected to the computer network as well, to be able to use it as a printer or a scanner or whatever. But this was still one that was just printers. And we actually literally, with the client's engineers and the client's manufacturing people and the client's purchasing people, tore the products apart. And we looked at things like how many different sized bearings do they have? How many different sized shafts do they have? How is the optical system, designed and configured? Is it a bunch of simple straight lines, or is there a lot of complex geometry? Because making complex geometry is harder and more expensive than making simple geometry. What kind of motors are they using? What kind of paper handling is there in there? And so literally physically comparing them. And then using the purchasing people to say, okay, let's go out and estimate, what do we think if we went out and bought this from a supplier, what would it cost? And so you tear it all apart. You look at it from a design point of view, you look at it from a materials point of view, you look at it from a assembly point of view and say, if I put all this together, what do I think my bill of materials for my competitor is versus the bill of materials that I've got, and where am I seeing opportunities? And so obviously you need some engineering expertise, you need some manufacturing expertise, you need some purchasing capability, you need some financial analysis capability to be able to pull that off. And so, again, the firm didn't have all that capability. Typically, we would partner up with our clients' internal functional experts, and we would manage the process. But over time, we also began to hire some people that could actually do some of that work themselves. So those were fun projects. And my background is I'm an engineer. I grew up in the automotive industry before I became a consultant. And so being able to do that kind of work in the context of it's in a McKinsey client service model, it was fun as we started to do more of that kind of work.
That does sound fun. So Jeff, I know that you have left the firm and you are on your kind of next leg of your career. Tell us a bit about your current teaching as well as the consulting that you're doing now.
I do a couple of different things. I teach at the University of Michigan, which is my alma mater. I teach in both the engineering college and the business school, but I only teach business. So even with engineers, I teach engineers that actually what you design needs to be able to, customers need to want it and be willing to pay for it. So helping them understand customer specifications and things like that, and then translate that into how do you develop a product and get it into market more effectively. So kind of teaching kind of the whole customer discovery and business side of engineering to engineers. And then I also, in the business school, I work with undergraduates in a consulting class. I help them learn how to think about interviewing clients, and we bring in, visiting executives, and they do interviews, they spec out and do problem solving, they actually develop and craft a turnaround strategy for a company that's in the avionics business. The aviation electronics business is a case that I created to help them do that. And so that's fun too. So I really love teaching. Turns out that about 80% of what you do as a consultant is kind of directly applicable to teaching. You need to learn some additional things to be able to be a teacher. I've now been doing that for about a dozen years, and that's a ton of fun. I'm not a research faculty member. I'm an adjunct faculty, but I've been doing it now since 2013. And then I'm also involved in a startup consulting effort, actually with my son, who was a consultant with Accenture for many years. And then he also worked for a small boutique firm in Cleveland called Magnet, which is a public-private partnership focused on serving smaller companies. And so my son and I are actually serving smaller private equity owned and startup firms primarily, or the innovative small groups within larger corporations. And we call it Shoreway Partners because we're in Cleveland, Ohio, and it's along the Shoreway. And so we work together. It's kind of fun. My son and I have very different perspectives on how to solve problems, but we find them to be complementary. So we're enjoying working together. And then I also, just like a lot of folks at this age and stage of my life, I'm an investor in a variety of small private equity owned and startup companies. And so I serve as an advisor and an investor with companies.
And Jeff, for listeners who would like to find you, where would you point them online?
Well, I think you could find us at shorewaypartners.com. That's where you would find www.shorewaypartners.com. Nobody uses the www anymore. And so that's where you could find me online. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Just enter my name, Jeff Sinclair, and it's in there. And I'm also you can find me on the Ross School of Business website at the University of Michigan. So it's three different areas where if you wanted to find me, you could.
Amazing. And last question, I know we just have a minute or two left, is any Marvin Bauer stories that you that come to mind that you'd like to share with us?
Marvin was a man who, he started his career in Cleveland, Ohio at Jones Day as a lawyer. I was in the Cleveland office of McKinsey for the first 20 years of my career there. And Marvin had a soft spot in his heart for Cleveland. And so it was always an honor when Marvin would come to visit. And he was just an amazing guy. He cared a lot about the firm. And I remember when I got elected junior partner, and at that time, Marvin would still write a personal letter to every partner when they got elected to the partnership in the firm. And it was just an honor to read. It was a very short letter. Congratulations, you're joining a group of wonderful people. You have not only an opportunity, but a responsibility to continue to build the firm, continue to do great client work, continue to help people develop their careers, that kind of a message. And Marvin was a special human being. And when he passed away, we were all sad and we miss him dearly.
Well, thank you for sharing that memory of him. Jeff Sinclair, we'll include your links in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks a lot, Will. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.